Welcome to the Radical Innovators series powered by Ronstadt. In each episode, we will bring to you bold and insightful conversations with top HR leaders from major global organizations to inspire the talent leaders of tomorrow. Join our journey as we explore how these trailblazers are shaping the future of work, driving innovation, improving the lives of their people, and creating radical shifts in HR and talent strategy. I'm Frank Congiu, EVP of Human Capital Strategy and Executive Partnerships at Ronstadt Enterprise. And in each episode, I sit down with industry leaders who are redefining the world of talent and business. Welcome back to the Radical Innovator series. Today, we're diving into the world of one of the most iconic beauty brands on the planet through the lens of its people strategy. Our guest is Stephanie Kramer, CHRO at L'Oréal USA, a global powerhouse with a legacy of creativity, science, and bold innovation. But Stephanie's journey to the C-suite is anything but conventional. With a career that has spanned marketing, general management, and even authorship, she brings a deeply human and refreshingly holistic approach to leadership. Stephanie's perspective is shaped by a rich blend of commercial savvy, creative instinct, and a profound understanding of its culture. In this episode, she shares how L'Oréal is building a people-first, purpose-driven organization where empathy meets performance, fueling a thriving culture. From her unique take on redefining hybrid work to the way L'Oréal empowers its leaders to lead with intention, Stephanie pulls back the curtain on how HR is not just supporting the business, but actively shaping its future. Whether you're in HR's talent strategy or just passionate about what it takes to make companies tick, this conversation is packed with insights on leading with the heart in a high-performance world. Let's dive in. All right, excited to be here today with Stephanie Kramer, CHRO for North America and L'Oréal. Stephanie, great to see you.
Great to see you too, Frank.
I think back to the first time we met when it was at a dinner that I was hosting and you were just getting ready to launch your book. So a lot's happened since now and then.
Yeah, it's amazing. Been like 3 years, right?
Time flies. Well, thank you for joining. One part of what we wanted to accomplish today is obviously, the podcast name is Radical Innovators, and it's really how do we extract some of the best practices that are happening within organizations and things that maybe you're doing and leading within your own organization and your team that are helping and improve the lives of your employees. So that's the goal, is to walk away with some insights and take some of the great things that you're doing here. As we shift to work, you've had a very impressive career leading up to your role. And I think one of the things that's unique is that you didn't come up through HR. So many of the leaders that I talk to they've come up through HR and it's all they've done throughout their career. Can you talk about a little bit what ended up leading to you taking this most recent role as the CHRO of L'Oréal?
Yeah, I think it's funny because when you look backwards, and you have said this before too, you can see all the dots and how they connect to each other, but I very much get my energy from people, not just being around people or the thoughts, et cetera, but watching them in action. And I think that part of my job is to be an enabler of other people's potential and the action for the business and the results. So it feels like the absolute perfect place for me. And I just love it so very much. But it's funny because when you're, a general manager of one of our businesses, you know how important the teams are. You understand kind of your role with your HR partner and your finance partners. But I think to see it from the other side has been incredibly, it's a real privilege to be part of the HR community, but also to bring a different sense to it. And frankly, even as previously to a GM, to be able to be a marketer, to really showcase all the amazing work we do and how we bring to life the EVP and how we bring to life everything we do as a company has been really exciting as well.
Oh, that's awesome. And to that point, I had Nicole, the CHRO of IBM, on last week, and I asked her, who are the top CHROs that you would point to as role models? And she said, well, let me preface it by talking about it's really the people that are closest to the business. And apart from mentioning you, she mentioned Monique from American Express. So wanted to share at least that you were one of the two people that she immediately mentioned.
Oh, well, I'm going to pay it back because I would have said her too. I think every time I hear her speak, it's such an amazing way to think about the business and technology and just a very forward vision. And again, with a lot of that energy and powerful spirit. And I would add to that to pay it forward. I think Lisa at Coca-Cola, who I know you partner with also for HR Innovators, and also Lisa Moore at Yahoo is also fantastic. Michael Vaccaro, giving a shout out to MasterCard as well.
Another
And
person who's been on the podcast.
there you go. So many incredible people who are creating the cultures that they want to have while also driving the business forward in new and modern and dynamic ways, which I really appreciate and have learned so much from so many of them. Constance, also give a shout out to the NFL.
There we go. So as you think about that, though, talking about the importance of building the culture that you want to build, how has your leadership principles or leadership style really shaped the day to day that's led to because right, it takes a while to shift a culture, but some of the day to day changes led to the culture of building to where you want it to be currently, and are there things that you're still looking to change and build towards?
I personally, I find that I very much align with what the fundamental values are of L'Oreal. So one of them being the entrepreneurial spirit. I always talk about myself as an entrepreneur. So I
Mm.
love having this kind of corporate structure so that you can push the walls, but also you have, people often say, how do you navigate the matrix of a large corporate organization? I'm like, well, that sounds really dire. And recently was talking on another podcast about how to me it feels like a trampoline. It feels like both a safety net, but not in a bad way. More like a safety net when you are going on the trapeze, West Side Highway, or like a springboard of how you bring people together. But I really find a lot of personal alignment in my leadership principles with that very strong entrepreneurial spirit we have as a very large organization, but you really feel like you have ownership. And I think that that's a really important part of what we are trying to create with our people first leadership culture, which is about feedback and growth and taking risks. And even you see it within some of our senior level roles, myself included, where I haven't, been in the role of HR before, but we stretch and grow and we thrive together when we can create the culture that we want for the organization. And it's valued both internally and also externally, both as an employer, but also because we always have top of mind consumer, which is a very big part, obviously, of how we do our work too.
No, I love that. I mean, it reminds me of sort of the role that I've been in the last 18 months, and which is an entrepreneur for sure, which is pushing the boundaries for an organization that did things largely differently. And I think it's fun to be able to be on the trampolines, as you said.
You have to do it with clarity and, fundamental values like trust or, for us, often when we talk about it, I talk about this magic triangle. I know we're going to talk about the magic triangle. I love the magic triangle, but of the role of HR, of employees and of people managers. And it can't just feel like this big word culture. It has to feel like both big word culture and lots of little tiny incremental moments that happen within that facilitated magic triangle. Or that's how we like to think of it within our role within HR, but it's not something you can top down, right? It has to really exist and it has to be built over for us, 100 plus years.
Yeah. I want, and I do want to get to the magic triangle. But before that, I was thinking about you talked a lot about people first leadership, and was
Yes.
curious what that means for you. And then, as the CHRO leading that, what does that mean for you personally?
So I think for us, a lot of people say people first, right? But the leadership part is actually the most important part of our people first leadership culture because we're the number one beauty company in the world. We have the number one market. We have a lot of number one brands and products. So there is a lot of implicit drive. But what makes people first leadership culture come together is your relationship and your responsibility as the leader of others for our people, our consumers in our world. And that's how we think about it from a frame perspective. And I think for me in practice, it really means about empowering our leaders. And from my book experience, it's called Carry Strong and Empowered Approach to Navigating Pregnancy Work, but it's empowered because there's so much that we can do individually and so much the organization can do to make sure that you're feeling it both on the individual level, but also as a collective. And you have you're in the driver's seat, but you're not alone, which I think is a really important dynamic to craft when you're trying to talk about culture.
So, what are some of like the specific best practices though? Because you've got a large group of managers. I think it's north of 3,000 people
Yes.
managers in North America alone. What are some of those? If people who are listening would want to walk away and say, "Oh, these are two or three things that I can take and I can implement within my organization to have more of a people first leadership approach."
So, one thing we started with, and Erica Keswin very well, workplace strategist. She had written this article about the not the managers, middle managers, but the managers at the center. And we really took that to heart because, as you said, we have 3,000 people managers. So, first tip is you make that important instead of just that they exist. How do you make that role and that magic triangle of the people manager, the employee, and of HR empowered and make that position, that organizational part of being a manager, something that comes with pride, responsibility, but also development tools. And you also make sure that there's resources available to them. So we had these very powerful tentpole moments called People Manager Town Halls, which we actually did very simultaneously across the country with actual live events. And they were interconnected between many of our different sites, with 16 major sites. And on top of that, we had in between moments called People Manager Salons, where our team is creating content, but actually not just HR, but with leaders in the organization to showcase major topics that are important and relevant to that month. So you get this kind of layer of people development and culture overall holistically, where you're recognizing it, you're talking about it in a big way and the role of the manager, but you also have these micro learning moments. And then last but not least, which is very important, is that we have a program called Connect. And Connect is, instead of just 1 year in review, you actually have 4 Connect conversations a year, which for some people, some of the feedback is, you want to have them all the time. You want to have constant feedback from your manager, but not everyone's like that. And sometimes you also need that very set moment where you're talking about goal setting. We're talking about feedback for each other. It creates a two-way dialogue in that moment that's very specific. You're revisiting perhaps some of that in-between feedback or project work or what you need or resources. And you have a moment to check in. You know, what do you need for your life right now? What do you want for what's next? Or how do you want to grow? Or who do you want to develop? Who do you know? And I think that that's a great way to have this infrastructure that allows the conversations to be really organic, but also feel very important in our day to day and the relationship between our people managers. And we really want to be a company that is known not just as a company of great products, but who create and develop great leaders, and not just for our company, but that go out into their communities, have an impact, and they come back into our company and obviously way beyond it too.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's right. It's there's people that would prefer to maybe have it once a year and check the box, but most people really do want that real time feedback, and I'm sure those people are still getting that, but adding in this rigor around at least at a minimum the 4 times a year certainly helps the majority of the people get that continuous improvement feedback.
And we actually see higher results in our internal surveys with those who participate in these activations. So there's a really powerful correlation to the data as well, not just for them as individuals, but for their teams. So we're able to measure the impact.
All right. So now tell me about the magic triangle. I tried to Google and see what I could find in advance.
I'm
And I
sure
was
there's something that exists. It's been
no, I
a
was
while.
coming up with like magic concealers and things that you guys offer. So it wasn't getting me to what I needed. So I'm flying in a little blind on this one.
Yeah. So, well, there's magic eraser, magic, lots of magic products, but for the magic triangle. Okay. So one of the things when I joined HR is often, I think, felt like with other entity. You have like, you have the business and you have HR, kind of like other. And what's so important is that in order for HR, modern HR, value creation HR to be successful, it has to be integrated and not alone. So you can no longer be the HR business partner who is doing everything that your boss wants you to do or everything that an employee comes to you and complains about. Yes, you have to help them to find out where and how those things can be done, or help that people manager to unlock what needs to be done with their teammate. But the relationship between the triangle part, the 3 pieces of HR, people manager, and the employee themselves can also exist independently. So you have the relationship for taking, for example, our shared services, which we call BEST, business expertise services and technologies, can have a direct relationship, HR to employee. You could also have that HR is facilitating that people manager upskilling that's going direct to that manager. Now, the relationship between the manager and the employee is happening without us. And the most successful HR is the one that you actually need us to be focusing on, being that coach, working on organizational design, facilitating those relationships and that business strength to be happening, but also that there's independent conversations and independent work that's being done is happening without us. And I think that's been really powerful to also not just talk about the role of HR, but also how employees see their own relationships and how to be in that driver's seat, but also again, elevating the role of the people manager, which is so very important.
So if you think about the three, right, it's the role of the actual of HR, people managers, employees. This has allowed your HR team to become more strategic now, freeing them up to do things that are more high value. Is that what you'd say is like the biggest outcome of this approach?
It's less about freeing them up to do, I don't know, individual work, which we've done a lot of work on systems also. So systems and technologies. I mentioned the shared services and kind of a different modern shared services approach, and also the role of the HRBP. So yes, in some regards, but it's also in terms of their own development, in terms of skills that we need to be focusing on for individuals, or what are the tools and technologies we need to be using, so that holistically we all move forward together. And there's a lot of ownership in it because one, we have super high engagement, but how do you create that enablement? You have to drive it through the individuals themselves versus doing it for them.
So in this model, what's the shift for the role of the employees?
Well, I think that there is a lot of ownership in terms of your own career mobility. If we think of all of the pieces of kind of the EVP, your own career mobility, where do you want to go? We have a very big organization, which is really fortunate. We have a lot of different functions and teams and locations and all of that. So we want to fuel that curiosity and growth and development and skills. Very big focus on skills as an organization in terms of what are you developing in your current role or future or projects and all of those different pieces. So I think the skills mindset is very much an important part of it. And then last but not least, it's so that you are clear on. I think right now companies are in a matching exercise or still maintaining a matching exercise. You can access your rewards information. You don't have to find a person who can help you to decode something. If you
Yeah.
visibly can pull everything together in one way, your conversation is not based off of fact finding. It's actually based off of holistic understanding and maximizing what you're doing, and ultimately what questions you have that can be answered by someone beyond what you can get from the system. So there's a lot of those tools and resources that exist, but it can't feel overwhelming. It has to feel enablement is the best word I can think of.
Yeah, I like that. So I want to go back to something you said when we first started, which was around leading in a banny environment. Um,
Yes.
what does that look like in terms of, and how's it gaining traction to, given all that's going on in today's complex environment? How are you using that to navigate market uncertainties, particularly given, um, not to date this, but there's massive headlines today around what's happening politically. Just curious how that's being driven and to what extent you need to be agile with that.
I think that it's a very helpful term for a bit of the sentiment that is being felt. And I've seen quite a lot of articles, and I'm sure many of you will now see them everywhere, see this term pop up. And what I appreciate is that, so as I mentioned, it's brittle, anxious, nonlinear, incomprehensible. So you're coming from it more challenging than VUCA. So more where volatility had some level of rhythm and not necessarily predictability, but almost like a carpe diem. So I see the VUCA had, I mean, this is in hindsight, but it had a little bit of more of that. Banny for me demands internal tenacity and transparency while asserting the strength of our EVP. So what is our company going to stand for? Or what are the things we're going to stay the course on in the business? I saw this fantastic article, which I'll share with you afterwards, which was, the brittle needs resilience, the anxious need attentiveness, nonlinear needs adaptability, and incomprehensible needs transparency. So how can companies and organizations maintain their values while also making sure that they're being that terra firma for organization, but you still have to have that attentiveness, adaptability, flexibility, non-complacency, where you're really committing to the future. So there's a little bit of that balance between um, how people may be feeling or the uneasiness, but also kind of the staying the course at the same time. And it's not an easy way to navigate, but I think that leaders just need to be very conscious of it in this moment, and how they want to show up for their teams, and how to focus also on keeping their business adaptable in the current environment. And it does feel very challenging to navigate. And obviously on the other side, how do you action what you need to action? And how do you know which are the things that are non-imperatives? And how do you continue to, again, maintain your values that are important to you?
Yeah, and that point you hit on in terms of resilience and been hearing more about this. I think about the last 3 dinners I've hosted, they were very specifically focused on a little bit more around mental well-being in the workplace.
Yeah.
And if I think about a friend, a mutual friend that we have in Chester Elton, who's written a lot about this and anxiety, and he always talks about anxiety being rampant in the workplace. I'm curious what some of the health concerns you're probably seeing are higher than ever. We see it in our business and with our clients. What are some of the strategies or things that you've been leveraging, or even steps that you're starting to implement to help employees that are dealing with higher anxiety at the moment?
No, I think that there's such a wide range of what both organizations and individuals need to utilize in these moments. So there's EAP. We offer EAP for 8 sessions through Spring Health. So direct therapy that you can use in these major moments or major life moments, which often require this. There's also the important conversations that happen with your teammates and how you
Yeah.
navigate those conversations. And I think relying on it's a leadership moment for so many for how you have the right conversations for in the workplace and outside of it. And then the last part is just making sure you recognize what you need for you. Even if as we were starting a conversation, like recognizing that this is a lot going on, and how do you find also that moment for you to refill your own energy that can feel depleted, or making sure that you take your moments of how you are decompressing. Because I feel like for so many leaders, and especially within the HR space, I feel like have felt like lightning rods, or frankly, shock absorbers, and actually often try to think of myself the other way around as a lightning rod. Like, how do I absorb some of these things and then ground it and stay grounded myself versus absorbing it, which I can imagine. And I've heard from many healthcare professionals that right now you can feel that you're carrying it, which of course was the case during COVID as well. But the incomprehensible or the nonlinear part of it, it can make it very difficult to do that on a day to day.
Yeah. And it's, I think, to your point, where you can bring it into the team and the team is actually there for each other. And we have a friend in Keith Ferrazzi that does a lot of work in this space, because the reality is, I mean, every company, I think it's nice to offer an EAP program, but the uptake is, I mean, from what I hear, is average 1 to 3% for organizations. So incredibly low uptake, even though there's significant need for them.
And you have to talk about it all the time, and encourage it. Encourage it with your leaders or in different types of moments to make sure that people are sharing that these resources exist. Like any resources, I think any companies, we all want our utilization to be high of the resources that we create, but you have to talk about it and you have to make it okay.
It's one thing to talk about, it's another thing to actually do it. And so
Mhm.
when you have a leader that can come out and talk about how they've leveraged some of the programs and reduce the stigma around it, but also open people's willingness to then consider it themselves. I don't know if that's an instance of which you've had, but one of the organizations that was at the dinner that I hosted last week spoke about how the CEO came out and openly spoke about their own mental health struggles and leading the organization through turbulent times. And as a result, leveraging the AP program was helping him. And then all of a sudden, there was a massive uptake in the program.
Absolutely. I mean, even this, again, alluding to the Smart Ace panel, I was talking about kind of my own experience as a working parent and going through pregnancy and trials and tribulations. And the one thing that I say is if you've had those type of experiences, the more comfortable you are with sharing them, it allows others to feel comfortable in sharing theirs too, whether that's in front of a podcast or in front of a group, but also just behind closed doors. So the more that you can, the more that you should.
Well, now I need to learn about oxygen sessions. Um,
Great. I'm glad we're going to go up on a high.
Yeah, exactly. So what inspired the idea and what made you think they were necessary to bring those to the organization?
It's funny because it's all the things we're talking about where I get very fueled by ideas. You know this because I get very excited when we talk about all kinds of like big ideas and many of the people that we talked about too. And sometimes I think we often talk about refueling, stepping away. And for me, I go for long runs or I spend time with my kids, or even I just shift my focus at work and I do something for a half an hour that's a bit different than maybe what I was doing before. So it's some tactical things. But one thing that I just loved and I recognized in my teammates was let's just get another perspective. And it doesn't have to be directly related. It's just finding a moment of time, pun intended, to breathe. So who can we bring in? What can we discuss? How can we kind of give ourselves some metaphorical oxygen so that we can try to, you know, think a little bit differently and just reset. And I think such an appetite for that now in a way that keeps us inspired while also keeping us grounded. And I have found it to be a really nice treat, but also very valuable for bigger picture thinking.
I could not be more aligned with that approach. I mean, I think about the CHRO dinners that I host, and I always intentionally bring in an interesting thought leader that I think can bring some interesting perspective to the table, but then allowing peers to be able to have a conversation and tee that up. I'm curious, who are some of the interesting people that you brought in as external speakers that have helped bring in new ideas or given energy to those oxygen sessions?
So we've done some that are a bit closer in, and the one that popped into my mind is we had Kevin and a team at Charter come into my entire HR team. So a very large group that we do in all hands once a month. I call them First Mondays. So the first Monday of every month, we actually had it yesterday. It was great. Thank you to my whole team that worked on it. And he did a debrief on Davos. And you can imagine that's my entire HR team. So there is a lot of different functions, a lot of different levels, a lot of different levels of experience, or maybe even curiosity about what Davos would be like. And it was such a cool moment to absorb it from all of our different directions. And then afterwards we discussed. So, but it was kind of macroeconomic, was talking about the environment that would be relevant to our workplace and workplace trends and what kind of came out of the meeting. But it doesn't have to be that direct. Frankly, I actually think I would love to have an oxygen session with someone who's a musician or someone who's a creative in a different way of like how they think about creativity. And I think the most important part of my made up version of what an oxygen session is nothing has to happen from it. Because sometimes for all of us, right? We find a great guest speaker, we bring them in because we want to talk about change and change management in our organization. No, oxygen session is not that. It is just interesting, different insight, thinking, opening your mind, and then either you can use it to inspire your work later down the road, but it doesn't have to. And I feel like that's kind of the gift or the caveat that I like to say is what makes it different.
Yeah, that's interesting, right? That's like the no pressure gift because I think
Yeah.
you go and see a keynote or you have this interesting and part of the benefit is that they do motivate you to do something differently and you're taking copious notes and then it's like there's so much that sometimes you do nothing with it or sometimes you pick one great thing. I think back to we had Terrence Morey come in and recently talk with us who I don't know if you're familiar with Terrence, but does a lot of work on disruption and talked about his version of BMI, which is bureaucracy mass index, and how to get rid of some of that to make your organization more productive. So I think it's interesting when you can have that benefit, but at the added benefit of no pressure to do anything with it, right? Is
And,
nice.
and it's very funny. It's like it's kind of surprising, I guess, right? You're going to invest having a speaker, or often what I like to do, and I think I encourage all of your podcast guests and listeners is that you kind of like exchange. I have someone who I'm like, hey, I really love your company. I will come and do this for you. Will you come and have this kind of conversation for me, completely different?
Yeah.
And I'm really excited about it. And it's nice. You're just kind of like, oh, that was kind of cool. Like it's surprise in a good way.
All right. Last question. So I'm going to give you a magic wand for this question. If you could change one thing within either your organization or just the HR world more broadly, with the wave of the wand, what would that be?
I think that what we're just talking about with the exchange and the sharing, I wish that we could do so much more of it. I think that I find a tremendous amount of value in learning from other organizations, other leaders, like taking, for example, the mental health topic. I'm really excited to be partnering with Project Healthy Minds across industries and kind of how we can focus on mental health, including workplace productivity in a different layer of it. But that opportunity to work collaboratively together, or especially in this banning environment, how are you navigating? And I think it happens organically, but I don't know how it can happen at scale. But I would love to do that, not just at a senior level, but how to do that kind of across the board so that people could feel like we have the ability collectively to influence positive culture, including in the US via our organizations. Because I really do think that that's possible.
Well, Stephanie, so great to see you as always. Sad I'm not going to see you later this month at the HR Innovators New York Summit, but I'm sure we'll find another time to catch up again soon.
Yes, thank you so much, Frank, and have a wonderful meeting. I wish I could be there, but I'm also excited to be with my team in town.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Stephanie. So great to see you as always.
Thanks, Frank.
What a powerful conversation with Stephanie Kramer, CHRO of L'Oréal USA. From reimagining leadership with empathy and intention to building a culture where continuous learning is embedded into the fabric of the business, Stephanie reminded us that leading with the heart doesn't mean compromising on performance, it means enabling it. Here are a few takeaways I thought were worth reflecting on. Human connection is the foundation of innovation, and HR is the engine that powers it. Hybrid isn't just a model, it's a mindset, one that demands trust, flexibility, and clarity. And perhaps most importantly, culture is a living asset, not a static idea. The organizations that nurture it intentionally will be the ones that thrive. Thank you again to Stephanie for sharing her insights, and all of you for tuning in. On the next episode, we'll be joined by Jackie Canny, Chief People and AI Enablement Officer at ServiceNow. Jackie is a transformational leader with a career spanning Walmart, WPP, and now one of the world's most dynamic digital workflow companies in the world. We'll talk about tech-enabled talent strategy, the roles of skills empowering agility, and how purpose-driven leadership can scale in fast-moving global environments. You won't want to miss it. Until the next time, stay bold, stay curious, and keep leading radically.
Human Forward. Randstad.